Chapter 1: The Weight of the Crown. The ancient paper felt like ash in Roric's hands, brittle and cold. Not just old paper, but a shroud, a death warrant for his principles. The air in his private study was heavy with the smell of old parchment and the faint metallic tang of his own simmering frustration. His eyes blazed. He wanted to tear the document to shreds. Barbaric. The word escaped him as a low, rumbling growl. His Leakin advisor, Farron, stood like a granite statue, his face carved with grim resignation. Farron wasn't just a general, he was the keeper of the Leakin Peace, a history book bound in silver-tipped fur. Farron's gaze, usually sharp, was dull now, heavy with the weight of centuries. "My king, it is necessary. It is the peace. The witches demand the claim for the treaty to hold. They demand a guarantee that the magic will be suppressed," Roric finished, slamming the document down. Not only that, but the ritual demanded a primal, irreversible binding that treated the witch like territory conquered, like a resource depleted. It was repugnant. Am I truly so weak I must become a tyrant to ensure survival? This was the core emotional question that haunted him every night. He hated that his lineage, the foundation of the Leakin world, was built on such savage acts. Farron took a slow, measured breath. The witches fear the raw, latent power that Liana Thorne possesses. They see it as a volatile weapon, especially since her birthright is so strong. They must be assured of control, or they will break the treaty and initiate a war we cannot afford to fight on two fronts. Meanwhile, Roric paced the length of the room. Every step felt measured, controlled, the opposite of the wolf stirring restlessly beneath his skin. He stopped at the window, the ornate carvings of the citadel's stone cool beneath his fingertips. He needed to maintain peace through duty, because his people were still rebuilding from the last skirmish with the shadow wraiths. He had to protect them. That was his job. The treaty calls for a claim. It doesn't specify how, gently, Roric murmured, the subtext heavy between them. He sought a loophole, he always did. Farron's eyes narrowed, a sign that the king was walking too close to the edge of tradition. "It is an ancient ritual, Your Majesty. It strips power. You know this. Trying to alter it now will be seen as an act of bad faith by the coven, and they will retaliate." Roric felt the cold weight of the crown settle on his shoulders. The treaty was a cage, but it was a cage that protected his entire species. Despite that, the thought of subjugating an innocent latent witch, even a politically necessary one, felt like blood on his hands. He was supposed to be King Roric Vargus, the honorable protector, not a barbaric relic of their past. "Bring me the royal seal," Roric commanded, his voice flat. He needed to sign the decree, sealing Liana Thorne's fate, and his own. He reluctantly signed the final decree, sealing his fate, and the ink felt like poison spreading through the parchment. What followed was the inevitable arrival of the political predators. The king knew his morning would be a siege of demands, all fueled by the smell of blood in the water. Chapter 2: The Royal Pressure Cooker. The throne room of the Royal Leakin Citadel felt less like a seat of power and more like an arena. The high, vaulted ceilings echoed with the nervous shuffling and hushed, hungry murmurs of his Leakin elders and a few visiting coven delegates. Sunlight, normally a symbol of strength, felt too bright, spotlighting the treachery in the room. To make things worse, the hardline elders had convened. They were all members of the sovereign factions, though Roric couldn't yet prove the conspiracy. They hated witches, they craved war, and they saw Liana Thorne's sacrifice as a weakness, not a strategic necessity. Their scent was acrid, thick with impatience and old prejudice. Elder Valerius, a massive male with scars Roric himself had given him decades ago, stepped forward. His tone was not of a vassal but a challenger. "Your Majesty, the date is set. The witch is en route. We must demand a quicker execution of the claim." The coven is already using her presence to leverage more trade terms. We must show strength. The claim should happen the moment her boots touch the ground. More importantly, this was a power play. Roric knew Valerius wanted the treaty to fail so they could conquer the coven territory. Roric met Valerius's demanding gaze with a stillness that was unnatural for a Leakin. His goal was to calm rising political tensions, because any sign of weakness would be exploited by the factions. Elder Valerius, Roric's voice cut through the air, cool and resonant, the treaty mandates a period of introduction for the perspective claimed to ensure compliance. We follow the letter of the law. I will not give the coven grounds to renege on our peace, nor will I allow panic to rule our actions. Still, Valerius pressed. The safety of the latent which is irrelevant. Her purpose is containment. We must send a contingent of Leakin guards into the coven lands immediately to secure. Enough! Roric's voice cracked like a whip. A wave of raw, contained alpha power rippled out, silencing the room instantly. He needed to employ restraint, yet he also had to project absolute authority. Do they mistake my restraint for resignation? Truth be told, Roric had to show stoicism. He had to prove he was in control, because the factions were banking on his moral reluctance crippling his tactical command. Here is one open loop. Why does Elder Valerius have a scar Roric gave him? Was it a battle or a disagreement over a principle? In that moment, as the tension hung thick enough to choke on, a coven emissary was ushered in. A slender woman, her eyes sharp and assessing. She offered a formal bow. King Roric, she stated, her voice tight, Liana Thorne has departed the coven scriptorium. She is making swift progress. Her arrival is confirmed for dusk. The words were simple, yet they were a hook that pulled Roric from his political skirmish into the eye of the emotional storm. Dusk. The moment Liana Thorne arrived, the clock on Roric's principles would officially begin ticking down to the final, barbaric claim. He was prepared to fulfill his duty, but he wasn't prepared for what he would see when he finally looked upon the witch who would sacrifice everything for his people. Chapter 3: The Witch Arrives. The sun was a bruised purple stain sinking behind the western peaks, casting long, fractured shadows across the vast courtyard of the citadel. Roric stood alone in the highest gallery, cloaked in shadow, watching. The courtyard below was usually bustling, but now, it was sparsely manned by ceremonial guards, their silver armor catching the last desperate light. Roric's heart skipped. Not from fear, but from a strange, low-frequency hum that vibrated in the air, the subtle echo of powerful, uncontained magic approaching. The heavy iron gates groaned open. Then, Liana Thorne stepped through. She didn't arrive in a show of force, nor did she cower. She arrived alone, save for two silent coven wardens at her back. She wore traveling clothes, simple gray wool that did little to hide the proud, yet slender lines of her figure. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, exposing a face that was beautiful, yes, but more importantly, composed. Roric watched, his breath caught in his throat. He had expected a victim, a wild animal cornered. Instead, she carried herself like a queen walking into a council, not a sacrifice walking toward the altar. He was instantly curious. Why is she not fighting? He observed her closely, cataloging every detail. The faint, oaky scent of parchment and ancient earth clung to her even from this distance, a testament to her life in the scriptorium. Her stillness was profound, like a deeply rooted oak enduring a gale. This was the witch destined to be stripped of her power, yet her aura, even subdued, pulsed with a latent, growing heat. As the wind shifted, Roric caught the smallest movement, a subtle tremor in her left hand, which she immediately tucked into the sleeve of her robe. That was it. The only crack in the facade. She was terrified, but she was controlling it. Here is the second open loop. What is Liana's true power, and why is it so dangerously latent? Her world tilted, or so Roric imagined, as she finally looked up at the citadel, at the towering, brittle beauty of Leakin architecture. Her gaze, even from this distance, felt like it found him in the darkness. Did she sense his presence? Roric felt a strange shift in his internal state. He had prepared to fulfill his duty, to claim the trophy, but this woman was no meek victim. She was a resigned strategist, and her quiet strength was a challenge to his conscience. He felt a sting of disappointment that she seemed compliant, yet he was fascinated by her iron will. Just like that, everything changed. Roric realized the claim wasn't just a political act, it would be the spiritual breaking of a formidable opponent. He felt a new protective instinct, because he saw the silent dignity in her acceptance. Without another word, the final ceremonial Leakin guard below sounded a long, mournful horn blast, marking the completion of her transit. The ritual was now imminent. Liana Thorne was officially within his grasp. Roric turned from the window, his mind already calculating. He had a duty to perform, but he was no monster. He needed a way to observe her, to measure her true strength. He needed a meeting, and soon. The tension broke only when he strode toward the main hall, anticipating the moment his path would finally cross that of the silent, composed witch who was about to change his life forever. Chapter 4: The Interruption. The air in the grand ritual chamber was heavy, thick with the scent of pine incense and the crackle of ancient Leakin warding magic. It felt like being sealed inside a pressure cooker. Roric stood before the stone altar, the flickering torchlight catching the silver crest on his armor. He could hear the rapid, anxious pulse of the assembled Leakin and Coven officials. His gaze swept the room, finding Liana Thorne standing rigid and small beneath the weight of dozens of judgmental stares. His immediate goal was to execute the ritual quickly and clinically, because the longer he waited, the more his resolve withered. He hated this. Every instinct screamed against the archaic process. He knew the words, the steps, the biting of the skin, the ritualistic drain of magical latent power. He hated the power it gave him over her. He stepped forward, the heavy silence amplifying the slight thump of his boots on the stone floor. He lifted his hand, beginning the slow, deliberate chant in the old tongue, the words that would make her his property and seal the peace. In the span of a breath, she moved. Stop! It wasn't a panicked shriek, it was a clear, ringing command that cut through the deep, guttural chant like shattered glass. Roric froze. Every head in the chamber snapped toward Liana. Elder Valerius, standing near the back, let out a low, infuriated growl. Liana Thorne stepped out of the shadow of her wardens. Her voice, though slightly trembling, was amplified by sheer will. King Roric Vargus, before the binding is enacted, I invoke the sovereign clause of the original Treaty of Ashen Silver. Roric's wolf surged, not in anger, but in shock and curiosity. The sovereign clause? Most supernatural politicians dismissed it as a myth. He was instantly intrigued, because that clause dealt with political alternatives, not magical sacrifice. The clause, Roric replied, his voice a low counterpoint, demanding control. State your terms. She met his gaze, her dark eyes flashing with brilliant, terrifying intelligence. Not only that, but she was holding every Leakin in the room captive with her composure. I propose a strategic, one-year political claim and engagement. The public contract fulfills the treaty's mandate for union and guarantees immediate peace. Within that year, I will work to find a less binding, permanent solution to satisfy the political demands of both the pacts and the covens. If I fail, the true claim proceeds. Just like that, everything changed. Roric saw not a victim, but an ally. She had outmaneuvered him and the entire council in a single move. His new immediate goal was to stop the ceremony without showing weakness, yet he desperately wanted this reprieve. He called for a recess, his booming voice echoing off the stone, the ritual is halted. The proposal will be considered. He knew this would infuriate the sovereign factions, but he couldn't pass up this lifeline, a chance to fulfill his duty without sacrificing his morality. Chapter 5: The Private Bargain. Moments later, Roric and Liana were alone in his private war room, a space of steel, maps, and suppressed tension. The scent of ozone from their hurried, angry movements lingered in the air. That was either the most brilliant political move of the century, or the most foolish, Roric stated, leaning against a large oak table, crossing his arms over his chest. He was testing her resolve. You have bought yourself a year. Why? Do you truly believe you can change ancient law in 365 days? Liana didn't flinch. She was standing tall, though Roric could smell the frantic pace of her heartbeat, a sweet, fearful scent beneath her controlled exterior. You agreed, she countered, her voice low and steady. Which tells me, King Roric, that you find the true claim as distasteful as I do. The subtext of her words landed like a physical blow. She felt it, clear as day, his burden. Roric stepped toward her. He needed to vet the proposal and assess her political reliability. Careful, witch. You walk a thin line between political necessity and treason. Why did you risk everything? Why not fight me, rather than propose a lie? Before the words left her lips, Roric sensed her inner conflict. She hugged herself briefly, a physical manifestation of her misbelief. Power must be protected at all costs. I fight for my power, Your Majesty, Liana confessed, her tone dropping to a fierce whisper. The claim would strip it, leave me useless to my coven, and worse, useless to myself. A controlled power is an asset to peace, a surrendered power is a liability to everyone. I am offering you an alternative to war, but only if I remain intact. You, King, want peace. I want freedom. Our interests align for 1 year. Roric felt a surge of respect. He was cautious, yet relieved his duty was delayed, because he saw her as a potential intellectual equal. Very well. The sovereign gambit, Roric confirmed, nodding. The terms: publicly, we are engaged. Privately, you are my political consultant, with a single goal: find the bond of mutual sovereignty mentioned in the Forgotten Coven texts. And if you fail, if the war risks breaking out because of your failure, the true claim proceeds, regardless of your power. With every heartbeat, Liana gave him a sharp, firm nod. 1 year. And you will provide me with access to the Citadel's historical archives. Every text. Agreed. Roric extended his hand, not for romance, but for a professional seal. Her small hand in his felt strangely warm, a spark against his cold resolve. The 1-year ticking clock was formally agreed upon. Soon after, Roric made the public announcement. The roar of dissent from the Leakin elders was immediate and thunderous. Roric had defied tradition, but he had bought Liana a year of freedom, and himself a year of moral clarity. Chapter 6: Entering the Lie. The mood in the Citadel was poisonous. Roric could practically taste the disbelief and fury of the hardliners. He was now publicly committed to the lie. As a result, Roric personally escorted Liana to her new quarters. They were lavish, but they were guarded by the toughest Leakin soldiers, making them a gilded cage. Consider this less a bridal suite and more a highly secure research bunker, Roric stated, his tone businesslike. His goal was to secure Liana and establish the boundaries of the lie. The public rules are simple: we present a united front. No public arguments. And you must look grateful. I am grateful for the delay, Liana replied, running her finger over the elaborate, cold carvings on a Leakin bedpost. She didn't know what scared her more, the lichens outside her door, or the speed with which Roric had agreed to their scheme. The private rules are even simpler, Roric continued, lowering his voice. We maintain distance. You focus on your work. I focus on managing the political fallout. My guards are loyal, but the walls here have ears. Assume every conversation is overheard. He was focused and professionally distant, yet he felt a strange, new protective instinct towards her, because she was now his only hope for a peaceful future. He watched her examine the room, noting her intense study of the wards placed around the windows. And what happens if your elders decide the threat to the treaty is too great and demand the claim now? She asked, turning to him, her eyes wide with a genuine, brief flash of fear. They won't, Roric promised, the truth of his threat hanging in the air. They will have to go through me first. That is the leverage your sovereign gambit gave us. I will use my power to buy you time. But then, Roric noticed it. High above the entrance arch, a figure stood briefly in the shadow of a gargoyle, Elder Valerius. The Leakin elder was watching them, his face hidden, but the intent was clear, silent disapproval, simmering threat. The sheer arrogance of the act, observing the king's private movements, confirmed Valerius's position in the sovereign factions. Roric's wolf stirred, a low, warning growl. They are watching. The lie has begun. Liana was thrust into the main conflict setting, and the emotional tension of their fake relationship, combined with the real threat of the antagonists, was now palpable. Roric knew their lie was fragile, and that Valerius's gaze was the first sign that their year would be far shorter than they hoped. Chapter 7: The Gilded Cage. The day after Liana's arrival, the atmosphere in the Royal Leakin Citadel was cold and brittle, like winter ice. Roric watched Liana from his high vantage point in the dining hall, a place he usually found peace but now felt like a stage. His immediate goal was to ensure Liana maintained the facade flawlessly, because the elders were watching her every subtle movement for weakness or deviation. Liana sat at the table reserved for the claimed, surrounded by Leakin courtiers who viewed her with thinly veiled disgust and suspicion. They saw her as a powerful witch, a natural enemy, and her engagement to Roric was a political pill they were forced to swallow. As the silence stretched, Roric noted her rigid compliance. She didn't touch the feast before her, she ate only a small bowl of spiced broth, her movements economical and precise. Her eyes, however, moved constantly. They didn't linger on the gilded ceilings or the massive wolf tapestries, instead, they were fixed on the flow of conversation, the shift of loyalty badges, and the subtle hierarchy of the court. She was studying them, absorbing the rules of the game with the detachment of a scientist observing specimens. She is still the strategist, Roric thought, feeling a familiar tension in his jaw. He was impatient with the charade, because Liana's calculated coldness only reinforced the elder's belief that she was an emotionless, political weapon. This lack of warmth meant Liana remained the trophy in everyone's eyes, not a partner. Meanwhile, Elder Valerius approached Liana's table. Roric watched the exchange like a hawk, his Leakin senses tingling with warning. Valerius's scent was cloying, syrupy charm layered over deep, bitter contempt. Lady Liana, Valerius's voice boomed, loud enough for Roric to hear clearly. We are delighted by your commitment to the treaty. Such sacrifice for peace must be applauded. Thank you, Elder, Liana replied, her voice soft but steady. Her voice trembled only slightly, betraying the immense effort of holding her composure. A pity about your magic, though, Valerius continued, leaning in conspiratorially. Such power, wasted on the claim. I hear your latent abilities were formidable. Do you not fear the power drain? Before she could move, Liana offered a perfect, practiced smile. Power is only useful if it serves peace, Elder. If my containment ensures the safety of our peoples, it is a worthy trade. That is the nature of sovereignty. In that moment, Roric recognized the lie for the flawless weapon it was. Liana had used the enemy's own words, containment and sovereignty, against them. But the exchange confirmed two things for Roric. First, the factions were probing for any weakness in her resolve, and second, the political cost of the lie was soaring. Not only that, but Roric needed a tactical advantage. He excused himself abruptly, sending a mental command to Hacken, his most loyal guard. He tasked a loyal guard to monitor her research efforts discreetly, because he couldn't afford a blind spot in her secret activities. He needed to know what she was finding, and who she might be talking to. That night would bring the first real test of their new arrangement. Chapter 8, First Assassination Attempt. The Leaken Citadel was vast, and the sheer volume of scents, stone, silver, age, and 1,000 lichens usually made it difficult to pinpoint anomalies. But then, Roric's senses screamed a specific, pungent warning: death. Roric was in the map room, reviewing troop movements, when the scent hit him. It was a faint, bitter almond smell, quickly being masked by strong coven counterwards, a magical attempt to smother the evidence. He knew that smell. It was a rare, instantaneous neurotoxin favored by black covens. Without warning, Roric transformed from king to blur. He didn't shift, he simply moved with the inhuman speed of a Leaken Alpha, tearing down the corridor towards the coven delegation wing. His goal was to protect Liana immediately, because the threat was lethal and required primal speed. He burst into the small library Liana had commandeered. She was slumped over a heavy tome, her hand twitching spasmodically. A small, ornate wooden box lay open nearby, and a thin, sickly sweet smoke drifted from it. A robed figure, a coven warden Liana had trusted, was fleeing through a magically destabilized doorway. "Liana!" Roric roared, his voice laced with the Leaken warning growl. He was filled with primal rage at the direct threat to his pawn, and the peace. He stepped forward. His enormous hands grabbed the source of the toxin, the wooden box, and crushed it instantly, incinerating the contents in his palm with a quick blast of Leaken heat before the magic could fully deploy. The lingering magic slammed against his physical wards, leaving a painful, echoing thrum in his ears. Liana struggled to breathe, the toxin already hitting her system. "The air," she gasped, her eyes wide, struggling for consciousness. Roric did the only thing he could. He ripped off his tunic, plunged a cloth into a nearby basin, and pressed the cold, damp linen hard against her nose and mouth, forcing her to breathe through it. He applied pressure to the artery in her neck, trying to slow her pulse and, thus, the spread of the poison. The tension broke only when she went slack against him, her faint, fast heartbeat pressing against his chest. As a result, Roric roared for his guards, his fury amplified by the near miss. This wasn't just a political warning, it was a clear assassination attempt orchestrated by the sovereign factions, confirmed by the ruthlessness and the highly specialized toxin. Roric's unwavering loyalty to the peace was tested, and he knew he could not trust anyone but his own instincts. He locked down the citadel, forcing a tense, high-stakes meeting with Liana in the aftermath. Chapter 9, Necessary Proximity. Liana woke to the antiseptic scent of Leaken herbal poultices and the overwhelming scent of Roric, cedar, ozone, and powerful alpha musk. She was alert, though pale. Roric stood over her, his eyes molten gold, radiating barely contained fury. The moment his rage subsided, he needed to assert his authority. His goal was to assert his authority and demand she trust his protection, because her secretiveness nearly cost her life. "You were nearly killed by your own warden," Roric stated, his voice low and dangerous. "Valerius probed you today, and that night, someone tried to silence you permanently." "They tried to prevent the claim," Liana countered weakly, pushing herself upright. "If I die, the treaty fails, and war begins." "They win." "No," Roric growled, slamming his fist against the nearby wall. The stone cracked, but he barely noticed. "They tried to kill the king's future consort. And it happened because you were here, alone, pursuing secret research." She didn't know what scared her more, his barely contained power, or the fact that he was so furious about her research. "I am on a clock." Liana snapped back, finding a surge of energy fueled by frustration. "I cannot trust your guards. your wardens, or your elders. I am doing the only thing that will save my power and the peace, finding an alternative solution. I will not stop because you demand control." Roric was frustrated, realizing Liana values her freedom more than her safety. He felt a burning annoyance at her stubbornness, yet a grudging admiration for her refusal to submit. "You realize," Roric said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her, "that your refusal forces my hand. I cannot afford to lose the key to the treaty. If you will not prioritize your safety, then I will." That's why Roric made a tactical decision that both surprised and deeply unsettled Liana. He ordered the installation of a cot directly beside her research table. "My security is absolute," he announced, his gaze unwavering. "Until you find that solution, I will be in constant proximity. I will ensure your safety, watch your research, and manage all your external contact. You are not just a prisoner, you are a vital state secret. I cannot afford for you to die because your continued existence is the single leverage point against the factions." Liana stared up at him, her eyes wide with initial distrust, quickly fading to reluctant acceptance. Initial trust issues are defined. Liana sees this as a constraint, but Roric sees it as tactical necessity. With his scent in the air, heavy and commanding, Roric settled into the large, uncomfortable cot. He was sacrificing his personal space and sanity, but he was doing it to understand the witch better and keep her alive. The two were left alone in the secure library, both silently staring at an ancient, ambiguous treaty scroll, the last, fragile hope for peace. Chapter 10: The Shared Burden. The Citadel Library had become Roric's prison and his command center. Meanwhile, the forced proximity with Liana was grinding on his nerves, yet it was also unexpectedly informative. He could smell the bitter scent of disappointment on her when a translation failed, and the faint, sweet scent of success when she unlocked a complex cipher. His goal was to publicly reaffirm the spirit of the treaty while protecting the lie, because the political pressure from the factions was reaching a breaking point. The sheer volume of surveillance, from the Elder's spies to his own loyal guards, was exhausting. Liana, utilizing the Citadel's ancient resources, discovered a minor, technical loophole, a forgotten provision requiring a coven overseer to witness the claim. She presented the findings to Roric, hoping to buy a few more weeks. "We can argue that the previous witness died before the treaty was ratified, rendering the agreement temporarily invalid," she explained, her voice low, the strategic thrill unmistakable in her tone. Instead, Roric shook his head. "It's a delay, not a foundation. And it only gives Valerius ammunition." Just like that, his prediction proved true. The factions used Liana's loophole discovery to spread rumors like wildfire. King Roric cannot commit to the old ways. The witch is poisoning his mind with weakness. The whispers questioned Roric's commitment, pushing the Pax toward open distrust. Roric was stressed, realizing his own people were fighting him because they feared peace more than war. Roric saw that a loophole wasn't enough. They needed a permanent, genuine solution that honored Liana's strength while respecting Coven power. The conflict intensified. He realized the fight was no longer just about Liana's freedom, but about preventing the wholesale collapse of his authority. After that, Liana dismissed the guards and walked to a dark corner of the room, pulling up the sleeve of her robe. Roric saw the fine, angry lines of a deep magical scratch across her forearm. It wasn't Liana-inflicted, it looked like self-harm from a failed spell or a magical backlash. She was meticulously applying a salve, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had been hurt during one of her research attempts, but was refusing to seek help. "Why hide it?" Roric asked, his voice rough. He felt a strange surge of concern, because he saw her action as proof of her internal misbelief that power must be protected alone, even from necessary aid. Liana didn't meet his eyes. "I handle my own weaknesses, King. You handle yours." Roric caught Liana meticulously patching up a scratch she got during the attack, refusing to seek help, a perfect echo of his own solitary burden. The observation solidified his need to break this isolation, both hers and his own. Chapter 11, The Midpoint Confession. It was late. The library was steeped in the quiet scent of dust and tension. Liana was asleep on the cot, and Roric was trying to decipher an obscure passage about Leakin loyalty oaths. The silence was heavy with their mutual, unspoken distrust. Suddenly, a small, smooth piece of jade, an enchanted protective amulet Liana wore, rolled off her research table and onto the stone floor, waking her instantly. "The defenses are weakening," Liana whispered, sitting up straight. "The factions are putting sustained pressure on the warding." Roric rose, moving toward her. He was exhausted by his moral conflict. The political pressure was suffocating his integrity. "The defenses are fine. It is our internal structure that is weak. You still look at me as the one who will eventually claim you and destroy you. Are you not?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the emotional barrier between them. Roric stopped a few feet away. He felt the weight of his father's crown, the pressure of his ancestors, crushing him. He confessed his secret/burden. "I despise the claim ritual. I always have. It is archaic, barbaric, and shameful. It reduces life to property. I would have found a way to delay it indefinitely, with or without your gambit." Liana stared, stunned. The air was thick with the scent of his honesty, a clean, sharp smell. This profound shift challenged Liana's misbelief that partnership is a trap. "You hate it?" she finally managed, her voice thick with disbelief. "My secret, which is that I am sick of duty-demanding tyranny," Roric admitted, the words raw and vulnerable. He had never been this honest with anyone in his life, because vulnerability was always a tactical weakness. "I don't want a trophy for my crown, Liana. I want a partner strong enough to ensure lasting peace, a co-sovereign. If you can't find that solution in the texts, I don't know if I can perform the claim without breaking my own soul." The tension broke. Liana's initial shock melted into a deep, analytical focus. She saw him not as the reluctant king, but as a deeply flawed, honorable man. As the truth unraveled, Roric took a step toward her. His goal was to be truly honest with the one person who could understand his burden. This revelation was the midpoint confession, the emotional pivot. Roric actively began seeking a genuine partner, not just a political pawn. Liana reacted with stunned silence, then a cautious, analytical look, a crack in her emotional armor. Chapter 12, New Foundation. Following the confession, the tone between them was instantly different. The cold professional distance was replaced by a taut, energized collaboration, like two sides of a complex equation finally fitting together. The sense in the room changed from tension and fear to the sharper smell of intellectual pursuit and mutual trust. "The true treaty," Liana mused, running her finger over a translation of the ancient Leakin script Roric had provided. "If the claim is merely a corruption, then what was the original contract? What did the founders intend?" With a single glance, Roric understood her direction. They weren't looking for submission, they were looking for permanence. For a bond. Their goals were now perfectly aligned. Roric found himself discussing politics and strategy with Liana as an equal, a feeling that was intoxicatingly dangerous. He was determined and energized by the shared vision, because he finally had hope that he could lead with honor. Next, they focused on the fragments Roric had found in his family archives, pieces detailing a powerful, symbiotic magical connection that enhanced both parties. "It mentions a bond of mutual sovereignty," Liana whispered, the words sounding sacred. "A powerful joining that legitimizes power rather than stripping it. It's a foundational treaty, a secret hidden from the warmongers on both sides who favored fear over stability. Because of that, their efforts intensified tenfold. They realized the true political fight wasn't finding a loophole, but exposing the original, empowering treaty that the sovereign factions had buried centuries ago. This plan increased their effectiveness, but the danger if the factions learned the depth of their collaboration was terrifying. To make things worse, they had to solve a lie to the court. Eventually, they attended a hastily called meeting of Roric's inner circle. They walked in together, not side by side, but close, a subtle intimacy that was new and deliberate. "We have decided," Roric announced, placing his hand protectively, possessively, on the small of Liana's back, "that the traditional claim, while binding, is inefficient for securing long-term peace. My fiancé and I will be exploring precursor texts to amend the final execution, ensuring maximum stability." The room erupted in whispers. Liana stood tall, her internal strategist shining as she met the horrified gaze of the hardliners. They had presented a unified, politically misleading front to the Leakin Council. As if pulled by a string, Elder Valerius's gaze locked onto Roric's hand on Liana's back. The elder's eyes were cold, calculating. Roric knew they had bought time, but they had also just declared war on the shadows within his court. The partnership deepens, and the stakes are now undeniably higher and personal. Chapter 13, The Public Challenge. The citadel was buzzing. The scent of fear and dissent was now as strong as the scent of stone and iron. Roric and Liana had spent days deep in the archives, but the time for secrecy was over. They had crossed the point of no return politically, and now they needed to leverage their fake engagement into a political declaration of war against tradition. His goal was to solidify their commitment to the new path and bait the factions, forcing them to reveal their hand. He knew Valerius and his allies would not tolerate the amendment plan. Roric strode into the Grand Council Hall, Liana at his side. This time, she wasn't just walking, she was matching his long, powerful stride, a subtle physical display of unity. "My lords, my ladies," Roric announced, his voice carrying the authority of his alpha lineage, "my consort-to-be, Liana Thorne, and I have completed our initial review of the historical mandates." Elder Valerius sneered, his gaze fixed on Liana's confident profile. "And what conclusion has the witch drawn, your majesty?" The word which dripped with scorn. Liana stepped forward, taking the lead Roric mentally granted her. She was defiant, resolved, and protected by Roric's steady presence. The core purpose of the treaty is peace through power stability. However, the existing claim ritual is inefficient and outdated. Therefore, King Roric and I will utilize the remainder of our engagement period, the next 6 months, to modernize the terms, securing the longevity of the treaty for future generations. Not only that, but Liana's use of terms like inefficient and modernize was a direct, calculated insult to the traditionalists. Valerius rose, his heavy frame shifting, radiating a cold, dark resentment. "The traditions of our ancestors are not subject to a witch's whims, your majesty. This is a betrayal of the pack. You are undermining the very foundation of Leakin law, because you allow sentiment to overrule necessity." Roric stepped in front of Liana, shielding her instinctively. "I assure you, Elder, my loyalty is to the future of the pack. If you continue to obstruct a clear path to stability, I will consider your actions treasonous." As a result, Valerius's composure cracked. He made a veiled threat, his eyes black with menace. "Loyalty cuts both ways, Roric. When the crown chooses weakness over strength, the subjects are forced to seek a stronger authority." Valerius turned sharply, addressing the assembled council with a calculated dramatic flair. "I cannot serve a monarchy that allows itself to be guided by the magic it is meant to contain. I resign from the Elder Council immediately. But mark my words, the true Lycans will remember this day of shame." Just like that, the faction's leader resigned publicly in protest, solidifying their separation from Roric's reign and confirming Roric's decision to commit to this path. The time for political maneuvering was over. Now, the battle would become direct. Roric knew their true intent. He had committed to a path of civil war within his court. Chapter 14: Exposure and Defense. The resignation of Elder Valerius was the signal. Within days, the sovereign factions launched their major operation, aimed at destroying Roric's credibility and inciting mass panic. The air thickened with malicious, unfamiliar magic. Roric smelled it instantly, a manufactured magical resonance designed to feel chaotic and volatile. It targeted the weak, frightened minds of the lower-ranking Leakin guards. A carefully placed public exhibit, an ancient, supposedly safe coven relic, suddenly began to sing. It didn't sing beautifully, it hummed with the sound of uncontrolled magical power, a terrifying, frantic frequency that preyed on Leakin instincts. The factions had amplified a low-level artifact into a source of panic. Roric's immediate goal was to calm the panic and defend Liana's innocence and loyalty. Lycans in the lower court began to snarl, their eyes rolling back in fear. They were being convinced that Liana's latent power was not just growing, but was currently out of control and threatening their lives. Valerius's allies, who had remained in the court, shouted, "The claim must proceed now. She is unstable. Her power will shatter the citadel." Roric was furious, realizing the factions have spies everywhere and they knew the secret of Liana's growing power. He stepped forward, ready to shift and use his physical presence to quell the fear. "Silence! This is an illusion," he roared. But the illusion was too potent. The fear scent was choking. Before either could speak, Liana stepped out from behind Roric. She didn't hesitate. She looked at the panicked faces, at the corrupted artifact. She knew she had to use a burst of her latent power. Her eyes, usually dark and controlled, flashed an icy blue. Her voice trembled as she fought the internal constraints she always maintained. "It is not chaos," she yelled, her voice magically magnified, overriding the artifact's humming. "It is fear created by lies." Liana extended both hands toward the corrupted relic. Roric saw the effort, sweat immediately beaded on her brow. She wasn't just casting a spell, she was wrestling with a powerful magical counterforce. The raw, uncontrolled magic poured from her in a shocking, brilliant cascade of shimmering blue light. It wasn't gentle. It was a wave of pure, concentrated energy, like a psychic punch, that hit the artifact, shattering the illusion and silencing the fear song immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Lycans blinked, their panic receding, replaced by terror, not of the artifact, but of Liana's sheer, raw magical potential. Roric had to rely on Liana's power to save his credibility. The shock briefly terrified Roric with her power. He realized a true partner must have strength, not be stripped of it. He needed a co-sovereign. This moment exposed Liana's true power to their shared enemies, but it proved her absolute loyalty to Roric and the peace. Chapter 15: The Cost of Commitment. The immediate fallout from the magical exposure was manageable. Roric's word, backed by Liana's decisive action, held the day. But the incident revealed the terrifying reach of the factions. That night, under the shroud of a silver moon, Roric met with Myra, a former captain of the guard who had been gathering intelligence in the shadows. Myra was critically wounded, her life force draining away. The air smelled of drying blood and metallic fear. His goal was to process the betrayal and reaffirm his commitment to Liana and the true peace. "Myra, who?" Roric asked, his voice strained. He felt the pain of his loyal warrior. He knew the personal stake had become critical. Myra coughed, her breath shallow. "The leak, the amplification, they used someone in your inner sanctum, my king. Someone respected. They are planning a political assassination of both you and the witch." She didn't know what scared her more than giving him the name, but she whispered it anyway. "It's General Kalen." Roric felt gut-punched. Kalen, his second in command, a man he had fought beside for decades, who had saved his life twice. Kalen was the face of absolute Lican loyalty, and he was the leader of the sovereign factions. He was realizing the depth of the enemy within his own house. How could Kalen, whose honor was legendary, advocate for this barbaric war? Roric sat in stunned silence for a long moment, the devastating betrayal washing over him. He realized Kalen's honor was tied only to the old way, conquest and dominance, not the partnership Roric now sought. In the quiet that followed, Roric looked down at the blood staining his fingers. He had just lost his closest friend to a misguided ideology. As the echo faded, Roric made the difficult decision. He could no longer afford restraint. He had to betray a trusted figure to save his kingdom. Without thinking, Roric gave the order to Hakon, the loyal guard he trusted implicitly. General Kalen is to be discreetly monitored. Every word, every move. Do not engage. We will move only when he makes his final play. Roric wiped the blood from his hands, the crimson a stark reminder of the sacrifices he was willing to make. He had fully committed to a path of civil war within his court, proving to himself and Liana that he prioritized their joint future. There was absolutely no turning back now. Chapter 16, The Political Execution. The blow was strategic, brutal, and perfectly timed. General Kalen didn't challenge Roric to a duel, he used the truth as a weapon. Come morning, an anonymously sourced pamphlet was distributed throughout every major Lican settlement and Coven outpost. It contained Roric's private confession, the midpoint revelation he had shared only with Liana and Farron, typed and translated perfectly. I despise the claim ritual. It is archaic, barbaric, and shameful. I would have delayed it indefinitely. The citadel erupted. The scent of betrayal and outrage was overpowering, making Roric's head swim. The factions used their influence to politically cripple Roric, because this exposure proved he was morally unfit to uphold the ancient treaty. Roric sat in his private office, the pamphlet crushed in his fist. His goal was to preserve his crown and prevent immediate civil war at all costs. The wolf beneath his skin was howling, desperate to rage against the injustice, but the king knew he had to be calculating. Instead, the Elder Council, now dominated by Kalen's allies, forced his hand. They summoned him, not to the throne, but to the center of the council chamber, treating him like a subordinate. Elder Valerius, back from his political resignation and radiating cold triumph, spoke for the council. Your Majesty, your own words have confirmed your intent to betray the treaty and plunge us into war. We have done our duty. To maintain the fragile peace, you must prove your loyalty now. You will publicly agree to execute the immediate, binding claim within 48 hours. Roric felt the world tilt. The ticking clock, which they had fought so hard to delay, had just run out. He was forced back into the tyrant role he hates, because the alternative was his death and the immediate slaughter of his people. I agree, Roric stated, the words tasting like ash. He was buying time, but the cost was Liana's future. He was devastated. He had been forced to sacrifice his morals, confirming every fear he had about his kingship. The factions appeared to have won the political battle. As the bond pulsed with Liana's silent distress, their constant proximity meant she felt his crushing defeat. Roric couldn't face her. He wrote out a final, cold order, handed it to his most distant guard, and sent it to her research room. Roric sends a messenger to Liana with a final, cold order to prepare for the ritual, unable to face her. The order reads simply, prepare for the claim. 48 hours. Chapter 17, The Research Dead End. Roric retreated to the library, the site of their short-lived partnership. The room now felt vast and empty. He needed to find a last-minute loophole through sheer effort. He clawed through Liana's scattered research notes, the ink blurred by his own desperate haste. The notes smelled like her, parchment, old tea, and the clean, sharp scent of her powerful magic. He was frustrated and defeated, sensing failure, because the external path to their goal was officially closed. With every step he took among the discarded scrolls, he saw the evidence of the faction's systematic sabotage. He realized that the last source they needed, a key Coven scroll, was retracted, confirming the faction's reach into the Coven archives. The problem was now one of submission, not strategy. He kicked a small stool in frustration. It clattered against a pile of Leaken history texts. He knelt, scooping them up, when he saw it, a small, almost invisible marginal note in one of the oldest, dampest Leaken texts. It was too water-damaged for the full context, but the fragmented words were clear: Bond of SOV, not CLA. The faint, ambiguous mention of the bond of sovereignty, the solution Liana was searching for, was right here, in his own archives, but it was useless. He couldn't decipher the context, and they had no time left. The frustration boiled over. He was so close, yet separated from the answer by centuries of purposeful obfuscation. Despite that, what truly broke him wasn't the dead end, but a small, leather-bound journal Liana had been using as a scratch pad. He opened it. It wasn't full of spells. It contained reflections on their discussions, small sketches of the Citadel, and one particularly devastating entry. He is a good king, not a monster. He is fighting for something real. I almost believe. I almost trust him. I trust the man I know. If he can break the curse of his own crown, maybe I can break the curse of my power. Roric saw Liana's personal research journal, filled with notes that show her growing affection for him, only to be struck by the despair that he has failed her. He had destroyed the fragile bridge of trust she had painstakingly built. The problem is now one of brute force or total submission. Chapter 18, All is Lost. The Citadel was preparing for the final, gruesome ceremony. The sounds of Leaken drummers practicing the ritualistic beat echoed through the stone halls, a heavy, funereal rhythm. Roric sat alone in the vast, cold emptiness of the throne room. His heart skipped painfully with every distant drumbeat. His goal was to accept his duty, even if it meant sacrificing his morals and Liana's power. He imagined the ceremony, Liana, eyes devoid of the fierce intelligence he admired, submitting to the ritual. He saw the cold hatred in her gaze when she realized he had chosen his throne over their partnership. Deep down, he knew the truth: he was becoming the tyrant he feared. His internal flaw, prioritizing the protection of his throne over fully trusting his partner, had sabotaged them both. He believed Liana would hate him forever, validating his core emotional question negatively. Utter despair settled over him, cold and heavy. He looked at the symbols of his power, the heavy, silver rings, the throne carved with ancient wolf heads, and saw them as chains. He felt his core strength, restraint/honor, as his failure, because his restraint allowed the factions to corner him. What is the point of a kingdom saved through absolute moral failure? He wondered, the rhetorical question hanging in the air. Can I ever rule with honor again? The drumming stopped. The silence rushed in, vast and absolute. This was the all is lost moment. The goal of true partnership seemed impossible. In the stillness that followed, Roric resigned himself to his fate. He would execute the claim, save his people from war, and live the rest of his reign as a morally bankrupt king, haunted by the memory of the witch he failed to save. A beat later, the door creaked open. Hakon, the loyal guard, entered quietly, carrying a small, sealed scroll. "My king," Hakon murmured, his voice gentle. "A summons. From Lady Liana Thorne. She asks to speak to you." Not as they claimed, but as the consultant. Roric's head snapped up. She wasn't asking for mercy, she was asking for strategy. A quiet summons arrives, it's from Liana, asking to speak. The timing was impossible, the request insane, but in his despair, it was the only thing that felt real. The climb back from the abyss had just begun. Chapter 19, The True Appeal. Roric entered the library, prepared for accusations, tears, or fury. He found none of it. Liana stood by her research table, the faint scent of fear replaced by the steely, clean aroma of determination. She wasn't dressed in ceremonial robes, she was still in her research clothes, a defiance in itself. Roric's goal was to find justification to fight back. He needed Liana's forgiveness and, more crucially, her continued trust. "I received your order," Liana said, her voice steady, lacking any trace of accusation. "The claim proceeds in 48 hours. Liana, I had no choice." Kaelin's move. Kaelin's move was brilliant political warfare, she cut in, but not unkindly. She met his gaze, and her eyes held no judgment, only a deep, unsettling clarity. "You chose the crown over me, Roric, and I expected it. A king must protect his people first. But that is the choice of the king you were, the one burdened by honor. The internal flaw is challenged and defeated. But the king I know, the one who confessed his shame, who risked his life to sit guard over a witch, who would rather crack a stone wall than crack my spirit, that king made a strategic error. He let the factions believe he was predictable." She stepped closer. She tells him she still trusts the man she knows, despite the political move. "I still trust the man I know. Because the man I know despises the claim too much to truly execute it. You lost the political battle, but we haven't lost the true war. Tell me, Roric, is there a single, ancient, secure vault in this citadel that even Kaelin's spies could never access?" Roric stared, stunned by her unwavering faith. She didn't need his pity, she needed his strength and his resources. In that moment, Roric realized Liana's belief in him was the key. Partnership wasn't a compromise, it was the ultimate strength. He felt a renewed resolve, because her faith was the only thing standing between him and moral ruin. Without thinking, Roric made his decision. He risked his life to access a hidden vault only accessible to the king during a succession crisis. There is one. Under the foundation of the citadel. It holds the oldest, most powerful texts, only opened when the line of sovereignty is threatened. Then let's go. We have 48 hours to rewrite history. Chapter 20, The Missing Key. The vault was deep beneath the citadel, accessible only through a hidden passage beneath the throne room floor. It smelled intensely of cold iron and earth, the magical words humming with ancient, terrifying power that would incinerate Kaelin's spies if they dared follow. Roric's goal was to provide the political ammunition they needed for the final stand. He was focused now, driven by the sheer excitement of the solution and Liana's ingenuity. As the air thickened with the vault's wards, Liana carefully unrolled the massive, bronze-bound Leakin text Roric had pulled from the deepest recess. It was written in a script so old, even Roric scholars had deemed it unintelligible. "It's not just Leakin," Liana whispered, tracing the symbols. "It's a mix of Leakin and High Coven script, a symbiotic language used only for binding contracts between the most powerful alphas and the founding witches." Together, they deciphered the ambiguous fragment Roric had found earlier. The water-damaged words bond of SOV, not CLA, finally made sense. "It says," Liana breathed, her voice filled with awe, "that the ritual is not claim, it is claim. And claim means union of sovereignty through mutual acknowledgement." Roric felt a dizzying surge of relief and fury. The entire history of their political tension was based on a mistranslation, a deliberate corruption orchestrated by the first warmongers centuries ago. The true ancient treaty didn't mandate submission, it mandated a powerful, unifying partnership. The solution to the main conflict is secured. They now have the legal path to victory, because the original text confirms that the claim is a forgery and the bond is the true law. Next, they formulated their high-stakes plan. They couldn't reveal the text now, Kaelin would destroy it before the ceremony. They must execute the bond in the place of the claim during the ceremony, using the ancient words, and only revealing the text after the bond is successful and the peace is secured. "We have the truth," Roric said, looking at Liana. "Now, we play their game better." Chapter 21, Gathering the Loyalists. The hours flew past in a blur of coded messages and tense meetings. Roric and Liana worked as one, their proximity no longer for security, but for strategy. Roric's goal was to mobilize his final, loyal resources for the ultimate showdown. He needed an army of witnesses. He meets with his trusted advisors and loyal Leakin packs, the few who hated Kaelin's warmongering vision as much as he did. He brought Farron, his advisor, and Hakin, his loyal captain, and 2 elder allies who had remained silent in the council. "The claim is a lie," Roric stated, his voice ringing with conviction, revealing the entire truth, the faction's plot and the true treaty mandate. He used the vulnerability he had learned from Liana to build trust. "Kaelin and Valerius have corrupted our history to ensure war. Liana and I are enacting the bond of mutual sovereignty tomorrow. This will not suppress her power, it will legitimize her power and secure peace." A loyal Leakin elder, Borin, a massive, grizzled male, growled low. "A bond that will empower the witch. That is a risk, my king." "It is a risk worth taking," Roric replied, meeting his gaze. "The factions want us weak. Bond makes us stronger than ever. I am asking you to stand with me, not just against Kaelin's forces, but against a lie centuries old. Will you witness the true law, or allow the forgery to rule?" Roric demonstrates his transformation. He leads by trust and partnership, not mere command. Borin, seeing the fierce, honest conviction in Roric's eyes, bowed his head. "We stand with the true sovereign, Roric." As if summoned, Liana entered, dressed in simple, but beautiful ceremonial coven silks. She met the gaze of every Leakin loyalist, her head held high. She felt it, clear as day, the immense, terrifying weight of their hope. Without another word, Roric and Liana walked side by side toward the claim location. They were dressed for a ritual of oppression, but they were carrying the secret blueprint for peace. The final showdown was imminent. Chapter 22, The Climax. The claim chamber was packed. The air was electric, thick with the conflicting sense of anticipation and fear. The sovereign factions, led by General Kaelin and Elder Valerius, stood prominent, their faces etched with cold victory. Roric and Liana entered side by side, radiating a unified stillness that belied the chaos brewing beneath the surface. Roric's goal was to secure the peace, defend Liana, and establish the bond. He was operating at peak intensity, his wolf and his strategic mind working as one. The time for the claim ritual was called. Kaelin stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with triumphant zeal. "King Roric, the council demands the binding claim to restore faith in the crown." Roric stepped onto the ritual platform with Liana. He did not pick up the ritual knife. Instead, he spoke in the old tongue, his voice powerful, resonating through the stone chamber. He and Liana began the ritual by invoking the bond of mutual sovereignty. "I invoke the claim," Roric roared, the ancient word causing a ripple of confusion. Not the claim of submission, but the Kalim, the union of sovereignty through mutual acknowledgement. Kaelin froze, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "Treason! He is attempting to desecrate the ritual. It is you who are the traitors, Kaelin." Roric countered, stepping back and pulling Liana forward. "You corrupted the treaty. Liana and I execute the true ancient law." The sovereign faction's leader, General Kaelin, was revealed. The elder from 5.3 was a red herring. Kaelin was the true threat, and launched their final, direct attack. Kaelin ripped off his ceremonial robes, revealing his battle armor. "If you will not rule, I will." In the span of a breath, Kaelin launched a magical assault, a wave of dark, crushing energy aimed at shattering the ritual platform and Liana's fragile concentration. Roric and Liana fought as equals. Roric shifted instantly, his massive, black lichen form radiating silver light. He met Kaelin's brute force with his own, focusing his energy not on Kaelin, but on protecting Liana's focus. Liana used her maximized power. She didn't rely on spells, she unleashed a raw, incandescent shield of blue magic that absorbed Kaelin's initial attack and then rebounded, striking Kaelin with the force of his own hatred. The air thickened with the smell of scorched earth and ozone. Kaelin recovered and drew a hidden ceremonial sword, lunging at Liana. Her body moved on instinct. Roric intercepted, taking the blow on his forearm. A growl rose in his throat, not of pain, but of primal fury. Liana followed up, binding Kaelin's legs with roots that sprang impossibly from the stone floor. Roric delivered the final blow, a calculated, non-lethal strike to the head with his armored fist. They had fought as a unified force, defeating the faction leader. The external conflict is resolved. The central thematic question is answered: partnership is sovereign. The full bond is successfully completed, locking in the peace. As the last of Kaelin's resistance faded, Liana placed her hand over Roric's injured forearm and spoke the final words of the true claim. A wave of warm, symbiotic magic, not draining, but amplifying, washed over them both. Their hearts locked, two pulses beating as one. The claim chamber fell silent, awed by the sheer power of their union. Chapter 23, Falling Action, Part 1. The fight was over, but the war was only just beginning to be won. Kaelin and Valerius were subdued and bound. Roric addressed the assembled lichens and witches. Still partially shifted, his voice rumbled with the authority of his victory. The raw power of the Kaelin bond thrummed in his chest, making his words resonate with irrefutable truth. Kaelin lied to you, Roric declared. He sought war for his own power. He buried the truth. Liana stepped forward, majestic and powerful. She presented the true, uncorrupted text of the bond. The law is not the claim of submission, but the claim, a union of mutual sovereignty. The factions, on both sides, conspired for centuries to keep the two most powerful halves separate. Roric ordered the full text of the original, symbiotic treaty read aloud, exposing the factions' conspiracy. He confirmed Liana's status as a free, powerful co-ruler. Winding down the major political plot threads, the shock of the truth rippled through the audience. Loyalty shifted immediately. The factions were dismantled, Kaelin and Valerius were taken into custody. Roric and Liana exchanged a private, powerful look. The moment their eyes locked, the chaotic scene faded. It wasn't the look of a king and his pawn, but of two weary, victorious souls who had found their home in one another. They affirmed their personal bond beyond the political, a silent promise that the hardest fight had been worth it. As the echo faded, Roric knew his moral debt was finally paid. Chapter 24, Falling Action. Moments later, Roric and Liana were back in the quiet sanctuary of the library. The sun was rising, casting golden light on the ancient scrolls. The air smelled of new beginnings. Roric was tending to the sword cut on his forearm. Liana approached, using her magical skill to heal the wound with a soft, pulsing warmth that felt better than any lichen balm. The lie is over, Roric murmured, watching the wound close beneath her touch. His goal was to affirm the transformation and commit to the future. The public engagement, the political pawn, all done. You are free, Liana. Free to leave the citadel. Free to rule the coven as you see fit. Liana looked up at him, her beautiful eyes shimmering. She felt it, clear as day, the profound peace and deep satisfaction radiating from him. And you, King Roric? You have the peace you craved. Are you also free of your burden? I am, he said, taking her hands and pulling her close, the raw energy of bond humming between them. Because my burden was loneliness, and my tyranny was acting alone. Roric lowered his voice, the low, rumbling sound intimate and filled with true love. The political lie is dead, Liana. But the claim, the bond of mutual sovereignty, that is real. It binds our power, not our hearts. But I want both. He formally ended the fake engagement and immediately proposed a genuine one. Lady Liana Thorne, witch sovereign, my partner, my equal. Will you marry the man who finally learned that the greatest power lies in trust? Liana didn't speak a strategic word. She simply reached up, pulled his head down, and sealed their fate with a kiss that was raw, desperate, and filled with the promise of centuries. Liana accepts. The internal conflict is resolved. Roric has secured peace and found a genuine partner, proving true sovereignty is found in partnership. The final scene shows them working side by side on the treaty documents. Liana's power flowed, guiding the ink, while Roric's hand steadied hers. They were rewriting the law to reflect their truth. They were a symbol of their true joint rule. Epilogue scene. 1 year later, the citadel felt alive, vibrant, smelling of new wood, growing herbs, and shared power. Roric watched Liana lead a joint Leakin/Witch Council meeting on their shared territory. She was radiant, fully potent, her eyes blazing with confidence and power. The era of the sovereign gambit was over, the era of the sovereign bond had begun.